Hello, everyone. My name's Kelsey Lemon, and I am a technical marketing manager for the global services team here at VMware. And I want to welcome you all to the Day 2 Mastery Series, where we're going to be focusing on providing you all tips and tricks to help you get the most out of the service. And, coming off of the success of our last customer webinar, it was so well received that we decided to do another one. And so today we have James Cruickshank. He is a solutions architect working with the cloud engineering team over at Sky. He's joining us today. And like Diane said, we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to change the format and actually have a conversation. We're going to talk to James and have him share with us his experience with Skyline and how his team is standardized on the service. And then with that, we also want you all to participate in the conversation as well. So I want you all to take advantage of the Q&A part at the bottom of your screen so that you all can sort of take advantage of James' subject matter expertise. And speaking of subject matter experts, I want to say that I'm very happy that we have Nick Fritz and Michelle Clopton joining us today. They're going to be manning our Q&A pods. They're our top guns. And so they're very excited about engaging with you all as well. And so with that, let's get started. And so, before I turn the reins over to James, I wanted to sort of just take a moment to sort of talk about the transformation process that we're currently undergoing as far as the support experience itself. It's really evolving beyond the typical sort of break fix scenarios. And it's actually moving more towards more autonomic processes where the support experience will actually be baked into the product itself. And issues are going to be automatically resolved and then reported back. And as we work towards that goal, we're actually more like in the intermediate stage right now, where we're giving the customer the ability to proactively, see support issues before they even occur with Skyline. And so as we sort of work towards that goal, we want to make sure that all the customers are really getting the most out of the service. And we feel that, as the solution sort of evolves, we're going to start moving more so towards the self-managing functionality. And the need for site-based support is actually going to start to decline. And we also feel that you're going to be reaping other benefits that James is going to discuss later on in the presentation in terms of his experience with the service. And so, from a high level, VMware is a proactive support technology that can help you avoid issues before they even occur. So again, you don't even have those issues in the first place. Skyline sort of helps resolve those issues even faster. So say, for example, if you've opened a case with us and our tech support team, they can actually use Skyline to view very environment-specific configurations, and they can use data-driven analytics to speed discovery and ultimately drive those faster resolution times. And speaking of environment, specific configurations, Skyline currently supports vSphere, NSX-V, Horizon, vSAN, as well as vRealize Operation Managers. And I should also mention, and here's the very best part about this, is that Skyline is available at no additional cost for our Premier and our production support customers. And as I move over to the next slide here, I wanted to sort of talk about Skyline's capabilities. They're actually sort of driving value to our customers and really creating champions of the service. Again, people like James here, who's talking about their experience with the product and how it's actually helping them constantly avoiding rather being in that sort of that firefighting mode. With Skyline, they're reducing that downtime, which is often caused by misconfigurations, and that increased network reliability actually transfers into less time fixing those errors. So with that being said, to date, Skyline has helped customers identify more than 12 million objects in their environments with potential errors, and customers are proactively resolving more about 40% of those on their own. And when the time comes, should you ever need to react to an issue, Skyline support team is actually here to help you with the use of our log assist feature, which James is going to be talking about a little later on as well. And so, with that, you're probably wondering how the proactive support experience within Skyline works. Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to actually install and configure a lightweight appliance that's called the Skyline Collector into your environment. And once that collector is actually installed and configured to your endpoint, it actually starts to listen and collect product usage data. And then based on that data, Skyline performs a very comprehensive analysis of all of the environment details. And then at that point, Skyline then begins to act to provide those proactive findings and recommendations based on a web portal. And speaking of data, I think this is a very sort of good segue to sort of talk about our stance on data privacy. The Skyline Collector, and I just want to really point this out, is that it's an appliance that's actually separate from the customer environment. And all of the data that is tagged is actually legally identifiable customer information. No customer data is shared with third parties like a partner without express approval. And for more information, you can actually go to the link shown here on the screen. And with that, now it's time for the star of today's webinar. I'm happy to introduce, yes, sir. I'm very happy to introduce, James. He's going to tell us about, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in your company, Sky?
Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction, Kelsey. Before I get started, I'd just like to take a moment to say thank you to the VMware team for organising today's session, and to everyone who's joined. I know it's very unusual times just now, and I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. I'm James. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm Scottish. Scottish people tend to speak very quickly, which makes this slightly worse. I'm also Glaswegian, and Glaswegians talk even faster. So Kelsey, if at any point I speak too quickly, or if you guys don't understand what I'm saying, please interrupt me. I absolutely will not be offended, and we can go back and cover off anything I've kind of went over too quickly. So this always feels a little bit like tech speed dating. I am a VCIX data center virtualization. I'm a VCIX and network virtualization. My background is actually in networking. Quite early in my career, I moved towards server virtualization. And with the advent of NSX, it became a really good tangent to cross-skill across both technology towers. I am a vExpert for the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm also a VMUG leader. So shout out to the Scottish VMUG. Look us up on Twitter, it's at Scottish VMUG. So to talk a little bit about my current role, I'm a solution architect, as Kelsey mentioned, at Sky in cloud engineering. Sky is a part of Comcast NBC Universal's family as well. Next slide, please. Perfect. So I need to get this out the roads. I'll do it as quickly as I can. Sky is Europe's leading direct-to-consumer media and entertainment company. We serve 24 million customers across 7 countries in Europe. As well as being a kind of broadcast, a media company, we are a broadband provider, and we're also a mobile or cell phone operator as well. Now, underpinning all of these, first and foremost, we are a technology company. We have a large in-house developer community, and that's backed by a large infrastructure ecosystem as well. Cool, next slide. So just to kind of go through Skyline adoption, Kelsey, I'm right in saying that Sky was the first European customer to onboard to Skyline as a platform. Yeah, I was wondering if I was just being told that to make me feel better, but yeah, thanks for confirming. As you can see on the screen, we have quite a large estate. This estate is growing every day as well, and what we are pointing at Skyline is growing every day. So today we have around about 900 ESX hosts, 20,000 VMs, and that's across 8 data centers in our platform. In terms of environments, we run everything we can, as much as we can, we point at Skyline. So sandpits, dev environments, stage environments, and obviously our production sites all send data today to Skyline. and that's across all of the technology towers, if you like. So our broadcast platforms, telco, and our private cloud. So that's really a large sweeping scale of infrastructure. It's from a handful of VMs on an ESX host doing transcoding through to our kind of cattle level deployment, so our private cloud, where there's lots and lots and lots of VMs, thousands of VMs in each environment. One environment particular to call out there, in our private cloud, we have a service called Elements. Elements allows Sky employees to log on using VRA and deploy OSs and deploy applications. So if anyone in Sky has got an idea or something they would like to test, that's a free service we offer out within the organisation as well. And all of these deployments, again, point towards Skyline. Cool, next slide.
Well, James, before you move on to the next slide, you just brought up something very interesting in terms of like the whole adoption process. And I was wondering if there's any sort of key best practices or tips and tricks you may want to share in terms of like what you've experienced with the adoption process and how others could benefit from that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So within Sky, we have this idea, a design principle of data center in a box. Our data centers we treat as availability zones within the DC structure. So one of the things we did early on in our Skyline adoption was to deploy a collector per DC, and that became a centralized DC service. That lets us do a few things. It means we don't have cross DC communication. We're not sending from one site to another. We send all of our connectors within the DC. So we connect our vCenters, VROPs, all the different bits and pieces, and those collectors, one per DC, upload to the Skyline Advisor. In terms of the adoption process, like I'm not being paid for this, but it really was really slick. It's not a hugely complicated service to stand up. The collectors are really straightforward. They're easily managed. They're lightweight. So it's a pretty straightforward thing to do.
Thanks for that.
Cool. Yeah. So next slide. As we mentioned at the start, this is very much going to be conversational. It's not going to be death by PowerPoint. In fact, this is my last slide. What I'm hoping to do is go through these kind of talking points in no particular order. If we have questions from anyone, please, as I said, interrupt, and we can kind of cover those in real time. That would be really useful. But to get us started, when you log on to the Skyline Advisor, the first page you land on is the dashboard. So it's a sensible place to start. There's two sort of main categories of user, I would term, in Skyline. So there's manager level users or management level, and there are technical users as well. So a lot of times I'll kind of refer to things as a really good manager's dashboard, and a lot of times I'll refer to things as a really good technical insight into your platform as well. So the dashboard has got a lot of really good manager content. If you kind of the things to call out on the site, stuff like account ID. The account ID is actually your VMware Cloud Services org long ID. Kelsey, keep me honest in all of this. When you raise a support request, if you have to raise a support request against Skyline, the guys will ask for that Cloud Services org long ID. There's a long ID and there's a short ID. So the long ID is the one they look for, and that's front and center on the dashboard. Underneath that, you'll see your EA number, so your entitlement agreement number. Next up is the environment overview. So this, again, is a really good single pane of glass view of your estate. So you can see how many VMs you have, how many ESX hosts you have. Kelsey went through the products that are there today. I was going to be really cruel and ask Kelsey, when am I getting NSXT? But Kelsey, I don't know if you want to talk about kind of future products.
I can talk at a very, very high level. And James, I'm very happy to say that NSXT is on the roadmap for sometime this year. I can't say with any specificity, but if you play this recording backwards, I promise that you can probably get the date.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the way the Skyline product is going, more and more products are kind of beginning to integrate with Skyline. It is a core kind of product in my view from VMware. If you guys have upgraded your vCenters, your ESX versions to, I'm going to say 6.7 U3, and definitely vSphere 7, you'll start to see stuff like the vSAN health check is now a Skyline health check. So that gives you an idea of the kind of really tight integration with products and the product suite in general. Next up is a little bit more technical. So the collector status is another box on the dashboard. The collector status gives you the 10,000 foot view on the dashboard of the state or the health of your collectors. So as I mentioned, we have 8 data centers, we have 8 collectors. Currently, today, they're all showing as healthy, they're all showing as green. What that will show you is an unhealthy collector or a disconnected collector as well, which is really useful information. One of the things I really like about Skyline is when there is a problem. So we have had issues with collectors not being able to talk to endpoints. So something was wrong with, say, permissions. The collector status isn't just unhealthy. It's unhealthy plus a KB article on the best practice to fix. I've yet to come across an error that's displayed in the portal that isn't accompanied by a KB. Now, that sounds relatively basic, but that actually really speeds up the time to resolution for these problems. We don't have to raise SRs to the GSS teams to VMware support. 99% of the time, we can fix these issues ourselves using these associated KBs that are targeted against an error. So it's definitely a useful page to go through. It's a well organized page as well. The details are very good, and as I said, always associated with a KB.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've been hearing quite often about, the service. Again, we're hearing that 40% of the customers are actually able to sort of proactively solve a lot of the issues on their own, which, again, gives them more time to do more meaningful work. So I'm very happy to hear that you're taking advantage of the KB articles and being able to solve the issues on your own. That's great.
Yeah, perfect. The last thing, or the second last thing, sorry, to talk about on the dashboard is about updates. So right on the center of the dashboard, you will see a link to release notes, a link to top KB's useful articles. The collectors in Sky, we have them configured to auto update. You can absolutely turn that feature off if you don't want your collectors to auto update. We don't see a problem really with allowing the collectors to auto update themselves. It's quite good. We get an email every so often in the morning to say these collectors were updated last night and it was successful, or it was not successful and they were rolled back, or whatever. So because we have the auto update feature, it's a really good place, again, just to cut out having to trawl through documentation. When we see a new release, there's always in updates the release notes for that new version. So you don't have to go trawling through VMware's documentation. It's front and center on the dashboard. The last thing on the dashboard is support requests. So that's on the right-hand side. This is another really good kind of manager view, if you like, for your estate. We talked earlier about the org, the cloud services org. If you raise an SR and choose, it'll say folder when you go into My Support and you raise an SR. If you choose the org name, then that will drop the SR into Skyline as well, so you'll have visibility in the Skyline portal. So that gives you a few bits of information. It's obviously a list of SRs that are currently open. It's also their status. So it's an inbound or outbound message waiting on engineering, like waiting on the customer, for example. If you click on those SRs, it will then open My VMware Support directly on that SR, so you can then get the granular detail for the SRs as well. So it's a really good central place to see SRs opened against your organization. Cool. So moving on, Log Assist. Again, I'm like, it's one of my favorite features of Skyline. If Skyline did nothing apart from Log Assist, it would still be a very valuable product in our arsenal. Log Assist, you guys will be aware of it as a feature, but it does two things really. It allows us to upload logs to an SR. So if we, like in Sky, we have environments that are hardened, environments that are secure. We set up our collectors to allow access via secure proxies, via secure firewalls. We can then upload logs from the collector directly to the SR. Now, what that means is our engineers don't have to drag what can be quite large amounts of support bundle data through firewalls and through jump hosts. It's really, really sped up the time to get log bundles to VMware, and therefore it speeds up the time to resolution of your SR. The sooner the VMware guys get the logs, the sooner we can fix, or the sooner the VMware guys can fix your problems.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. You talk about how the log assist feature sort of automated the process, and prior to that, all the manual sort of hoops that you had to go through in terms of getting log bundles for general, different types of products and services that VMware offers. But I don't want you to throw a number on it, but in terms of just the overall sort of productivity piece here, I mean, you've already said that this one feature was worth the price of admission alone. But is there anything specific that you wanted to call out about log assist as it relates to the way it automates versus the manual practices that you've done in the past?
Definitely, to be brutally honest, I don't have numbers, but I am certain there is a tangible correlation between time to resolution and our ability to use Skyline. So it absolutely speeds up the process. And to be honest, not speaking specifically about Sky, if in your organization you have a high priority incident, if you're losing money because something is broken or something is offline, like anything you can do to improve time to resolution is a benefit. And that's one of the great things Skyline gives us.
Very good.
Cool. So next up, I'll kind of talk rounds about prevention being better than a cure, a little bit rounds about vulnerabilities and exploits as well. So in Sky, we have a goal to automate as much as possible when it makes sense to do so. So we have our infrastructure teams are all about infrastructure as codes. It's all about consistent configuration. One of the things that Skyline gives us, and it's a product that, to be honest, it would be either very difficult for Sky to replicate, or it would just be impossible. There's no benefit in the amount of time we would have to spend to develop Skyline internally would outweigh the benefits we get from the product. Ultimately, even with code control, with all the best practices round about infrastructure, things still get missed, things still get changed. So quite rightly, if somebody needs to do something at 3 in the morning because they've been called out for an issue, the goal is to return service. Now, that might mean through troubleshooting that the configuration of that item may no longer be consistent with the platform. What Skyline gives us is a really useful set of configuration tools, a useful set of config checks. So an example that happened relatively recently in Sky was NTP, so time service on an ESX host. The service was up and running, it was correct, it was using the right NTP servers, but they were in the wrong order on one host. So through troubleshooting, somebody changed NTP 1 and 2 to 2 and 1. Now, we would never have picked that up. Like, it's not something we have a check for today. We check the service, we check it's in sync, but we don't check the order. That's really granular of NTP services. Skyline reports that as a finding. So it reports that there is and one of our 900 ESX hosts had an inconsistent configuration. So that's, again, it's something we couldn't do ourselves. And it's something that it sounds really trivial with NTP, but if you kind of think of that process for other more relevant or more dangerous changes, then we get to see that level of detail reported back to us automatically. We don't have to ask for it. We get the findings sent to us, which is great. The same goes for vulnerabilities and exploits. We in Sky have this goal of automate where possible, automate when it makes sense to do so. Skyline for us is really like a silent partner. It's a system that's always there, always running, always checking. And it's this weighing up the benefit we get from Skyline versus doing it ourselves is absolutely weighted, and we can just use Skyline to do that. It's a great tool to keep an overview of your estate, and that is really particularly important when it comes to CVEs. So when it comes to security vulnerabilities, it's important that we get a view of what issues there are in the estate. It's also important that we get an accurate indication of what is vulnerable and where is vulnerable. So if we get, for example, if we had a new CVE tomorrow, subject to a few days for Skyline to ingest that CVE and get best practice, we would have a report that would say this CVE exists in your estate, and here is the 1, 2, 10, 50 ESX hosts that are vulnerable to that new CVE.
Yeah,
For
speaking
us
of
to
that,
manually check that, sorry, Kelsey.
I was going to say, speaking of that, you just sort of triggered something in my head. Has Skyline revealed any vulnerabilities that you may not have been aware of? Any surprises, I should say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is common in our sandpit environments. So in our sandpits, the guys are building and destroying ESX all the time. So they build to certain versions. It does a job for their testing. Skyline is reporting on sandpit environments. It's reporting on disposable infrastructure. So we can see that although it may not exist very long, it may be genuine sandpit kit, but we know that it's vulnerable to these CVEs. And that's something that we would never manually catch that because it would be deemed as a sandpit. It would be deemed as something that's okay. It's not. It's not anywhere near production. It's sandpit or canary deployments. So Skyline really gives us visibility to bits of the estates that we wouldn't have spent time on before, but now we have that information and we're aware of it. Another great, pretty surprising use case for Skyline within Sky is really to help us with our customer onboarding. So within Sky, within our infrastructure areas, we have customers that want direct access to vCenter, direct access to NSX, direct access to ESX even. Not all of the customers in Sky go via a cloud portal. So we quite regularly hand over environments of infrastructure like true IaaS to customers to use. Skyline is now built into our process. When we hand over a new environment to one of our internal customers, we hand it over with a Skyline check already being carried out on that environment. I'm going to go on to talk about OSRs. We actually include the OSR as a document in our handover packs. It's something we hand over to our customers. It's also something we publicise that this is our seal of approval. It's an unbiased system that is checking our environment, checking our homework, and allowing us to, with a degree of confidence, hand environments over to customers, knowing that, as I said, we have someone who's impartial checking the homework, checking our working. We're not tempted to do something we shouldn't, because Skyline
Right.
will check and report on it anyway.
It's sort of funny that you mentioned that because I've heard other customers sort of talk about the importance of OSRs and how they're able to use that report, like you said, is almost like an unbiased third party talking about the status of it, and it's very, very well received by those who are looking at it, and they can see sort of like the remediation plan, if you will, and so it gives confidence that the service is working and that the team that's managing the environment's on top of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, let's talk a little bit around OSRs for everyone on the call. They come in two flavors, I guess. So standard and custom. So standard OSRs are produced automatically every 2 weeks.
Yep.
You can have a custom report generated as well. So if you engage with your TAM or your account manager, they'll be able to produce an ad hoc custom report as well. So again, it's a really useful document. Within Sky, we actually publish them centrally as well. So we have a history of our OSRs. I mean, they're kept in Skyline, but we publish them so they're widely available in Sky. And it gives us a view of where the estate was, where it is today, what we've changed to improve the estate, what we've changed to clear some of the findings, to fix some of the findings. Just to nip back to customer onboarding, we can come back to OSRs in a second. For customer onboarding, another kind of surprising use case as well was really about accuracy. So I talked about this with prevention being better than a cure. When we have config checks, we build in build into our process that Skyline producing an OSR is also a seal of approval on our config. It is best practice. It is standardized. There's no findings in an environment that we hand over to the customer. A really good example of, like a real world example of that is obviously with COVID-19. I think 2020 probably is the year of VDI. A lot of customers are increasing their VDI footprint, their working from home ability. The same happened in Sky, so we had to quite quickly hand over environments or infrastructure to our Horizon teams, to our Citrix teams. And Skyline was key, really round about the consistency and the speed that we could hand those environments to our customers. If we had to go through the number of checks that Skyline does, if we did that manually on an environment, it would take us quite a long time. We can rely on Skyline to produce that automatically for us and check automatically and consistently for us. Cool. So we've kind of covered OSRs as much as I think they need to be covered. The TAMs, really engage your TAM. It's a good custom report. As I said, the standard reports are useful. We keep them and publish them internally in Sky. It's a good unbiased document of the health of your estate. Cool. So moving on to findings, this is a kind of day 2 webinar, so you guys will be well aware of what is available in findings, what kind of information you can get from the findings section. There's a couple of things I would quite like to call out that I found useful using the findings, and it's pretty low-level admin stuff. It's not really specifically into the depth of the technology, but it's useful, so I thought I might share it. Being able to sort by is really useful. There's 2 things to call out there. Sorting by date is a really powerful thing to do. It kind of allows us to use Skyline as a bit of a forensic tool. If we have something that changed in our environment, or we have an unusual behavior in our environment, we can use the Skyline findings sorted by date to correlate a new finding on a particular day to a known bad state in our environment. So it becomes a really good track of change within your estate as well. Just on the sort by, at the top right hand side, if I remember correctly, there's also a list view. So the tiles are great. It gives you a lot of information in the tiles, but if you're sorting by date, you can also change the view to list, and then you get a slightly easier to read date format down that list of findings. The ability to mute and unmute findings is great. As I mentioned, we have environments that we hand over infrastructure. We don't really have any concern when it comes to VM deployments. So a lot of the checks in Skyline are checking stuff like VM tools being in date, hardware versions for VMs being in date. If we don't really particularly care, or the customer has a reason not to upgrade those particular VM level settings, we can mute the findings in Skyline so we don't clutter our reports with stuff that isn't really relevant to our estate. Equally, we can unmute those findings as well. So once you mute them, they're not gone. You can just easily go in and unmute that as well. The last thing to call out on findings is the ability to export as well. So what our guys have kind of fed back is we quite like the ability to export findings. When we raise changes, for example, to patch a vulnerability, we can export that finding. And it almost gives us a pre-canned, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is how we're going to do it. So we don't have to find that information ourselves. It's there, it's available. Again, speeding up the support process.
It's like an automated to-do list, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that's anything that can save like operations engineering time is a valuable thing. So moving on from that, I guess upgrade recommendations it's another really interesting feature in Skyline. We do a couple of things in upgrade recommendations. I'm sure we're all well aware of the interoperability matrix. I was worried I wasn't going to be able to say that, but I said it well done. Yeah, so we're all pretty aware of that site. We're all used to going in and saying, if we patch to this ESX version, does it support NSX-V? Does it support VROPs? Are they all interoperable? Skyline more and more is giving us that centralized view. So we can go in and say, I want to patch to this version. Is it compatible with vSAN? Is it compatible with ESX, vCenter, etc., etc.?
Yeah,
Sorry, Kelsey, after you.
I was just getting ready to say that I've heard a very similar sentiment, from customers in terms of their reluctance to do upgrades because they may not necessarily know that it may, while fixing something, it may break something else, and that interoperability matrix sort of gives that assurance that if you were to do that upgrade, not only are we going to fix these problems, but we're also going to show you the proper order of the sequence so that we can minimize any sort of risk or any detriment to the network and things along those lines. And so it's been something that has been well received. So I'm very happy to hear that you guys are taking advantage of it.
Absolutely. And I guess the second part of the upgrade recommendations is really the biggest bang for your buck. So a lot of organizations, they will not patch to kind of GA patched releases. They will maybe one behind or two behind, whatever, depending on your infrastructure. What we can now do is say, if we patch to this version, we potentially will resolve 90% of the issues we have in our estate, or we could do 99%. We could go to a level that solves all of the findings, and it gives us a really good view of where we should be patching to, depending on criticality, depending on the vulnerability, and those kind of things. To do that manually, again, it's really difficult to correlate different CVEs to different ESX versions to different patches, and the multitude of variations within all of those things is really difficult to do manually. Skyline's given us that as an automated function, which is great. I suppose this is from my brain through the webinar, so this is some kind of hints and tips that I found quite useful. It's not necessarily Sky's opinion on some of this stuff. It's definitely what I found in my lab when I've been playing around with Skyline, and equally with our production Skyline deployments. A couple of gotchas I found when a vCenter or any certificate of an endpoint changes. Just be sure to go into the Skyline collector and refresh that endpoint. That will then pick up the new certificate and then re-establish that connection. That definitely caught me out in my lab environment. Being able to set a root password expiry is another useful thing. It's pretty low level, but if you can log on to the collector directly, and you can either bring the root password expiry closer, and you can have it reset itself every X many days, or you can extend it. So in my lab environment, obviously it's extended, and it's as long as it can be, so I don't forget the passwords. Talking about forgetting passwords, you can reset admin and root passwords on collectors. It's well documented. There are VMware KBs to follow. It's a really straightforward process, obviously subject to you having access to do stuff on the console of the VM. A couple of other things on my list to talk about. So proxy settings, I mentioned earlier in our telco estate, we have to go through secure proxies, we have to go through firewalls. So the proxy set in a couple of places. We can do it on the VAMI, so the Virtual Appliance Management Interface. That is all about connecting to the upgrade service. So if you want to manually upgrade your collectors, you can go and set a proxy to do that on the VAMI. Equally, if you go onto the GUI, the normal GUI for the collector, you can set a proxy to upload to the Skyline Advisor. So it's a little kind of quirk in there. One's on the VAMI, one's on the collector GUI itself. And as I said, VMware guys, if that's inaccurate, then correct me. I might have that one wrong. Last thing from myself is when you do log on to the VMware Cloud Services portal, on the right-hand side, there's a tab that says Support. If you jump onto that Support tab, there's two things in there. So the KB articles and the documentation in there is context aware. So if you click on Support on a page where you have a problem, it will show you relevant documentation to that page. which is really useful. Again, about cutting down the time an engineer has to look for a resolution. The resolution is almost always being presented to the engineers. And the second thing is the service status. So I'd encourage everyone to go in there and subscribe to service status. So that's not Skyline specific, but you'll see services to do with VMC on AWS, Tanzu services, obviously Skyline, all of the Cloud Suite products. You can subscribe to service alerts. So when patching is going to happen, or if there's an issue, that will be, you'll be notified of that before it happening, which is useful if you're running production services on this. I suppose with that, I'd like to thank the VMware team again for organising today's session, and obviously thanks everyone for joining.
With that, James, just want to say, thank you. It was definitely a pleasure having you present your experience with the service. And so with that, we're going to conclude today's sort of webinar. But again, no webinar would be complete without a call to action. And so if you're not already using Skyline, I want to encourage everybody to go out and adopt it on the spot and start using it today. There's also some very useful links here in terms of being able to get access to the actual tool. There's a hands-on lab where you can practice with it in a sandbox environment, if you will. There's also FAQs, and there's also a Skyline community if you ever need to get help with the actual service itself. And with that, we're going to set aside a few minutes to see if there's any questions online that we can answer. Michelle, Nick, are there any interesting questions that we can sort of talk about live here in front of our studio audience?
Yeah, let's see here. So we had a couple questions around what's exactly exposed to the internet. Are the vCenters exposed to the internet? And the answer is no. It's just the Skyline collector that's exposed to the internet. So the specific vCenters and products are not exposed directly.
Well, with that, I think we're at a point where we can go ahead and officially conclude here, James. And again, it was a pleasure having you here with us and share your subject matter expertise. And with that, looking forward to seeing you all in our next webinar. Make sure that you're registering for that. And also, I want to say, just send us some ideas on some other topics that you may be interested in hearing, and we can customize these sessions to anything that you guys want to talk about or hear about. And with that, good night.